There are stories about first contact, where people meet great and wise civilizations. But that's not what my story is about. It's about how one ridiculous breakfast decision helped humanity conquer the galaxy. Seriously. I was in the most prestigious space harbor in the galaxy at the time, just floating there and watching what could only be called the greatest gathering of alien egos in the entire universe. The halls of the Space Council resembled a space masquerade, where everyone appeared without any theme. There were typical tentacle-like creatures, crystalline rock people, floating gas clouds, and each of them had their own problems. And of course, there were species that seemed to have been invented by a group of rebellious teenagers. But the main star of the whole spectacle was Silera, the Council's leading telepathic investigator. Imagine this, 2.5 meters tall, with skin like polished obsidian, for arms that moved with such grace, as if she practiced synchronized swimming in her spare time, and eyes that shone with the confidence of someone who had never met a mind that could not crack. Silera was a real star of the Council. For the past 5 centuries, Silera has been the Council's chief expert when they need to extract information from recalcitrant subjects. Political dissidents, space pirates, tax evaders, and even someone who constantly parked his spaceship in a restricted area without permission, they all crumbled like ashes the moment she made contact with their minds. Her success was absolute, not 99%, not 99.9%, but 100%, because apparently in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations, no one had figured out how to protect their thoughts from persistent telepathic invasion. And so, finally, Terra got out of its technological cradle and sent its first official diplomatic mission to the stars. The Council, being so hospitable, decided that the best way to greet humanity was to immediately test their mental defenses. Well, just to understand what they have to work with. There is nothing friendlier for a first impression than a spontaneous mind scan. The representative of the people, Ambassador Alexander Reed, was a man who seemed to have been specially created to be as inconspicuous as possible. He was of average height and build, with a face that you would forget in a couple of seconds after meeting in a store. He was wearing a dark blue suit that was probably bought at the equivalent of a diplomatic discount store, and he had an expression of barely contained excitement on his face, like a child who found out he was going to Astrograd but was trying to behave professionally. Poor Alexander had no idea what he was getting himself into. The council chamber was filled with anticipation, like before a public humiliation on live television. Alexander approached his workplace with the casual confidence of a man who was about to carry out a routine check. After all, what could be difficult about reading someone else's mind? Solara, from a race that had only recently learned to leave her planet without exploding, placed one of her 4 hands on Alexander's shoulder with the solemnity of someone who was just checking her mail. She closed her shining eyes, activated her telepathic abilities, and prepared to enter his mind. She expected to find simple thoughts about food, reproduction, perhaps some primitive territorial instincts, the mental equivalent of a children's picture book. However, what she found was akin to trying to get drunk from a fire hose filled with caffeinated chaos. The first thing that struck her was Alexander's immediate concern about whether he had turned off the air conditioner in his hotel room before heading to the meeting. This was immediately followed by a detailed mental analysis of his breakfast choices, lingering anxiety about whether his tie was sitting straight, and the sudden realization that he had no idea how to get to the meeting on time. Alexander had to memorize half of the alien names, but that wasn't all. His brain was simultaneously engaged in a complex analysis of the political implications of this first contact, while he wondered if the blue alien in the corner was condemning his posture. He was calculating the potential economic benefits of interstellar trade agreements, while wondering if his deodorant was working after morning stress. Somehow, in the midst of all this, Alexander managed to have a pleasant conversation with the council members about the weather conditions on Terra. His lips were saying things like, "Yes, our seasonal changes are creating diverse agricultural opportunities," while his brain was screaming, "Did I pay for parking? What if I get a fine? What if they evacuate my car? Do I even need a car if I'm a space diplomat now?" Trying to catch the main thread of Alexander's thoughts was akin to trying to follow one conversation at a noisy party, where everyone was enthusiastically discussing completely different topics. His mind was simultaneously processing the architectural beauty of the space harbor, going over in his memory all the awkward remarks he had ever made to women, scrolling through the shopping list in his head and composing, as it seemed to him, a witty answer to the next question. The most puzzling thing was that these thoughts didn't seem to interfere with each other. They were all running at the same time, like the most chaotic operating system in the universe. Alexander felt a deep existential sense of dread about humanity's place in the cosmic order, but he also felt proud that he had managed to get dressed without soiling his shirt that morning. Celera's orderly, methodical mind began to feel like she was trying to put together a puzzle. A problem where all the parts are the same color, and possibly from different sets, has never been unsolvable for her. Alexander simultaneously pondered deep philosophical ideas, casually referenced pop culture, worried about his finances, and had detailed internal debates about whether he was flattered by the boardroom coverage. He continued talking, completely unaware of the mental chaos he was causing Celera. It was then that everything took an unexpected turn. Celera made the mistake of trying to delve deeper, thinking she could find some kind of organizational structure in Alexander's mind, a kind of file system, perhaps a neat hierarchy of thoughts ordered by importance or relevance. Instead, she found herself face to face with Alexander's memory of his attempt to assemble a Valhalla home goods bookcase last weekend. Now, for those who have not experienced the unique form of psychological torture that Swedish furniture assembly is, imagine trying to assemble a three-dimensional puzzle designed by someone who has a clear dislike for this concept. Alexander's mind wasn't just replaying events. Oh no, it was a full-fledged sensory experience, complemented by a growing sense of frustration, a growing certainty that he was missing key elements, and a gradual descent into madness that comes with the realization that the little cartoon man in the manual is definitely mocking him. While Scylla was trapped in this furniture nightmare, Alexander's current consciousness was simultaneously experiencing a separate anxiety attack about whether he should call his mother more often, and not just whether he should call, but a complex emotional calculation of family debt, guilt for not calling her in the last solar cycle, anticipating the stress of what she might want to discuss, and the strange shame of being an adult man who still needs his mother's approval to make important life decisions. These two streams of thoughts were going on at the same time. Trying to insert the tongue into the slot, Syl experienced a feeling of frustration and guilt because she had missed Matriarch's Day 2 cycles ago. Her thoughts were torn between her career growth and the significance of this event. The most disturbing thing was that all these thoughts were equally important and urgent for her mental state. Alexander's mind was a real center of psychological anguish, and he was experiencing a full-scale existential crisis. He lived in the present, while simultaneously immersing himself in intricate daydreams about his life as a nerd in zero gravity. He wondered if the star plants judged him for his life decisions, and was gripped by anxiety about the potential existence of aliens. Scylla, analyzing Alexander based on his appearance and the history of the environment, realized that she was no longer just reading his thoughts, she was experiencing them. The telepathic connection had become two-way, and now she felt the full weight of human emotional complexity. She felt guilty for something she'd never done, anxious about problems that didn't exist, and strangely, inexplicably proud that she'd been able to park perfectly in the center of Coruscant. Other council members began to notice that something was wrong. Celera's usual serenity was replaced by an expression of growing horror, like someone who has just realized that she is stuck in an elevator with a broken audio system playing the same music in a circle. She tried to break the connection, but Alexander's mind was like a mental quicksand. The more she tried to escape, the deeper she sank into the beautiful and chaotic mess that was human consciousness. Scylla discovered a truly frightening aspect of the human mind. It is not fully aware of its own thoughts, but it still functions as a competent society. Alexander was deeply puzzled by the question of whether synthonutritious pasta could be considered a drink. This was not a fleeting thought, but a full-fledged philosophical study, including the definition of drinks, the role of temperature in food classification, the cultural implications of categorizing breakfasts, and a thorough analysis of the spoon-to-liquid ratio as a determining factor in culinary taxonomy. While this mind-blowing argument was raging in one corner of his mind, another part of him was simultaneously developing what he considered a brilliant strategy to defend humanity from a potential alien invasion. He didn't think the current aliens were hostile, but he knew better than to take any chances. His plan involved a complex combination of guerrilla warfare, war tactics, psychological operations, and the surprise factor due to complete unpredictability were the three pillars of his strategy. The really disturbing thing was that he seemed to attach the same importance to all three. The issue of synthenutrient paste and the survival of humanity received the same level of mental attention and emotional involvement. Scylla's alien consciousness, ordered and structured, struggled to understand this contradiction. Her thoughts were logical, purposeful, and linear. You prioritize important issues and don't waste cognitive resources on philosophical reflection when planning an interstellar war. But Alexander's mind worked according to a different paradigm. He could hold conflicting ideas without apparent discomfort. He could be deeply concerned about the future of humanity, while at the same time being completely unreasonably confident in their abilities. He felt deeply. The speaker was grateful for the opportunity to represent his species, but he also wondered if it was really suitable for this task. He could experience a mixture of paralyzing self-doubt and unfounded optimism, and yet, in the midst of all this mental chaos, he managed to give coherent answers to advice requests. His lips formed phrases like, "Terra's technological progress has been rapid but steady," while his mind analyzed whether the strange movements of tentacled aliens reminded him of the chaotic pasta in his school's cafeteria. He realized that he was witnessing humanity's greatest evolutionary advantage. It wasn't the use of tools, adaptability, or pack-hunting instincts. It was their ability to function normally while experiencing complete mental chaos. They turned a mental disorder into a superpower. Other species developed logic, reason, and clear thinking in order to survive. People have apparently chosen to use mental disorder as a superpower. They didn't need rationality, and disorder was a feature, not a disadvantage. They could make important choices while their minds were occupied with 17 different problems, 12 random memories, and at least 3 completely hypothetical scenarios. The telepathic feedback intensified, and Scylla felt her own mind begin to split, trying to process all this information. Alexander's thoughts began to wander as she wondered if she had properly charged her meditation crystals. She also felt anxious about a test she had never taken for a course she had never attended. Her consciousness seemed to spread like an infection through a telepathic connection, turning her ordered thoughts into a chaotic symphony of random experiences, forgotten responsibilities, and philosophical questions about the nature of cosmic meat products. At that moment, Alexander's mind abruptly veered into uncharted territory. One moment she was deep in thought about the political implications of interstellar trade agreements, and the next she was grappling with a full-blown existential crisis over whether her response to a simple greeting was inspiring enough. Not just whether he was polite, but whether a certain tone, moment, and facial expression conveyed the right emotion. Alexander was professional and friendly, but he didn't look insincere or overzealous. He replayed the entire conversation in slow motion, carefully studying every word, every subtle facial expression, and every possible interpretation of his words. He wondered if "thank you, how are you" was too general, or "thank you for asking, I'm fine" would be too much, or if he should have provided more specific details about his well-being. He also wondered if his question about their day was a sincere interest or just a social obligation. It wasn't a fleeting moment of social anxiety. It was a comprehensive post-communication analysis that would have impressed the behavioral psychology team. Alexander considered alternative scenarios, calculating probability matrices of how his answer could be perceived. He simultaneously felt confident that he had handled the situation perfectly and was absolutely convinced that he had made a terrible first impression. Meanwhile, in the depths of his mind, Alexander was engaged in deep philosophical research about whether the extraterrestrial guests had any decent snacks. His curiosity wasn't just academic. He was genuinely concerned about the standards of interstellar hospitality. He wondered if it would be culturally appropriate to offer to share human snacks, and if alien digestive systems could handle Terra's food. He also wondered if mentioning snacks at a diplomatic meeting would look professional or cute. Scylla's mind, which had functioned as a finely tuned instrument for centuries, was now struggling with the full brunt of human overreflection. She was worried about social interactions with species she had never met, and wondered about snack protocols for these unknown creatures. In a way, she felt both paralyzing self-doubt and irrational confidence in her telepathic abilities. The feedback was reaching a critical point, and Alexander's thoughts about the synth-nourishing paste were overwhelming. Scylla, trying to focus on one aspect of Alexander's thoughts, lost her composure. To regain her mental balance, she asked a seemingly simple question. "Are space tube meat sandwiches a mistake?" Alexander's mind immediately began to reason, which could only be described as a dissertation on the philosophy of sandwiches. In a moment of extreme mental stress, Scylla inadvertently transmitted Alexander's entire mental state to every member of the Space Council. Suddenly, every being in the room was experiencing Alexander's thoughts, including his worries about the air conditioner, philosophical musings about breakfast food, and his surprisingly detailed plans for defense against invasion. The council chambers descended into chaos as dozens of alien intelligences struggled to cope with the overwhelming influx of human consciousness. Syl collapsed from the strain, her mind shutting down to protect herself. Alexander finally realized that something was wrong when the telepathic investigator fell to the floor with a thud, as if someone had dropped a bag of angry cats. The entire council chamber fell silent. It was really amazing, considering that just a few moments ago the room had been filled with lively chatter. "Oh my God, is she okay?" Alexander asked, and there was uncertainty in his tone, which often occurs in situations where you don't know if you should worry or if such behavior is the norm. His thoughts raced. He wondered if he had unwittingly caused what had happened, whether he should offer help, or whether touching an unconscious alien would be considered an act of aggression. He wondered if the aliens even had doctors. The Crystal Council member, who had just discussed Terra's mineral resources with Alexander, was now looking at him with an expression of pure horror. His usually prismatic appearance became completely opaque, as if the lights had gone out in him. He managed to say in a voice reminiscent of the rasp of quartz, "What was that about space meat products, Alexander?" Alexander blinked, completely confused. "I didn't talk about space meat products. Were we supposed to be discussing space meat products? Is this some kind of diplomatic problem that I overlooked during the briefing?" His thoughts were racing, wondering if there was some important cultural exchange related to processed meat products from Terra that he had somehow overlooked. An alien with tentacles in the corner was making a sound like a faulty air conditioner, which Alexander was sure was not a good sign. Several other council members were backing away from him as if he were radioactive, their limbs twitching in barely contained panic. The creature in the form of a gas cloud, which usually emitted a steady purple glow, now flickered like a fading neon sign. "These terrible questions about breakfast food. How do you live with such thoughts? I mean, the synthenutrient paste is quite peculiar when you think about it," Alexander replied. "I fully understand the deep sense of fear in the alien's voice. It sounds like we're just pouring milk into a synthenutritious paste and calling it food, but when you think about it that way, it really seems pretty primitive." This statement caused several council members to make sounds expressing shock, which would probably violate the rules of noise on most civilized planets. The head of the council, a majestic reptilian who had maintained impeccable composure throughout centuries of interstellar diplomacy, now pressed all 6 of his hands to his temples, as if trying to keep his brain from popping out through his ears. Ambassador Reed stated, "We have decided to immediately approve humanity's application for full membership in the Space Council, with all the associated benefits and protections. Please take this documentation and return to your ship as soon as possible." Alexander beamed with joy like a child on Christmas morning. "I thought it would take months of negotiations, but it turned out to be much easier than I expected. Should I call Terra? Do I need to sign something? Oh my God, wait until I tell my mother about this." The mere mention of Alexander's mother caused a visible tremor throughout the room. The head of the council quickly stated, "No signatures are required. Everything was pre-approved and accelerated. Please proceed to the designated floor." Scylla began to come to her senses, letting out quiet sobs, which indicated a possible psychological breakdown. The medical team surrounded her, but they seemed hesitant to approach, as if she might be contagious. "Should I wait for her to come to her senses?" asked Alexander, because he was a decent man who felt regret when others were hurt, even if he had no idea what had caused it. The crowd replied in unison, "No." 15 different species joined together in a symphony of horror, which would have been an impressive sight if not for the deeply disturbing experience that Alexander had when he was escorted out of the hall by a group that looked like security. He was already mentally compiling a report for Terra, proud of his achievement in successfully completing humanity's first diplomatic mission, albeit with some uncertainty about meeting a mind-reading woman. He was considering whether to include the fainting incident in his official report, fearing that it might have a bad effect on humanity. 3 cycles later, Scylla was still in therapy, working through what her therapist delicately called the profound effects of human cognitive patterns. She developed a nervous tic, which caused her to think about the classification of breakfast food from time to time, and she had to be sedated when someone mentioned furniture assembly. The Space Council issued a galaxy-wide message classifying the incident. The human mind, as a collective, poses a cognitive risk. All telepaths are advised to avoid mental contact with humans unless absolutely necessary. It is recommended to use appropriate mental protection. Alexander returned to Terra as a hero, unaware that he had inadvertently turned human consciousness into a weapon and injured the galaxy's most experienced telepathic investigator. His main concern during the return trip was whether his expense report would be approved and whether the food on board would be considered a full meal or just an unusual snack. The complex structure of human consciousness has officially become humanity's greatest diplomatic advantage, even if no one on Terra is aware of it yet.